guys. All right, cool. So let's get the recording going. So anyone who cannot make it live for various, family work obligations can still learn all of the things later. Okay, cool. Let's start by having you folks introduce yourselves, because I've kind of already done that, but the writers don't necessarily know you. And let's start with Charlotte and then Danny. So we'll do ladies first on this one.
Okay, cool. I love that. So I'm Charlotte. I was a writer on the NBC sitcom Perfect Harmony, which just finished our first season this fall. Prior to that, I worked on the show Life in Pieces, which was a CBS sitcom. And before that, I was working in development at the media company Refinery 29.
Huh.
Cool. All right, Danny, who are you and what do you do?
I am a television agent at APA. I primarily work with writers and directors, staffing, but also development. So it's primarily shopping material, specs and pitches from writers, directors, but also working with producers and shopping IP, just anything underlying narrative to it. But primarily writers end of the day.
All right, cool. I love it. So you guys, I love that we have both a rep and a writer, so we can get both perspectives on staffing season, which may or may not have been intentional on my part when I emailed you guys to be on the panel.
He definitely will have some good info that I won't have from the other side of the line.
Yeah. We'll have a well-rounded panel here. Cool. So I think it's important to get out of the way early. For anyone who may be unfamiliar, what is TV staffing season? Goodness gracious. And roughly when does it take place?
Are we still going ladies first or just?
You go ahead on this one. You go ahead on this one.
Okay.
All right, Danny, it's all you.
I kind of get away from the term staffing season because it's not really a season anymore. I think we're talking more broadcast staffing. That's probably the more structured schedule in terms of staffing, because broadcast, at least for now, is still on a very structured schedule where there's development in the summer where they're hearing pitches to networks and stuff, and then they're working on notes and feedback, and then they're signing on pilot pickups top of these that just happened this last few weeks starting in January. And right now they're in production, and during this time, as showrunners and producers and studio execs are working on set, doing production, then going to post, people are slowly starting to read potentially for the rooms that they have if they get picked up. So those usually happen in May, toward closer to upfronts is when they go to New York and when the networks present their lineups to ad revenue sources. And then rooms would start in June, and then that cycle continues. So that's broadcast staffing season in a nutshell. But when it comes to cable streaming, from the Sci-Fi's, Showtime, HBO's to like the Netflixes, now HBO Max, Disney Plus, it's all year round. Like the last couple of weeks before the holiday break was busy with staffing for a lot of these shows. Coming back from the holiday break, there was a lot of staffing going on. I always tell clients there's rooms that will start in like April, May that we don't even have on our radar yet because things keep coming in and out. And there's a lot of mini rooms. There's a lot of shortened orders nowadays. And so it's just kind of a madhouse of like different pacings based off different networks and outlets on where they're going to staff and when the timing is.
Yeah, cool. That's so fascinating to me because I used, to admit some personal bias, I used to be an actor back in the day. And, when you're first acting, it's like, okay, you have to be in LA for pilot season from like, I don't know, mid to late January through like early May, maybe late April, early May, something like that.
They still are. And like, we definitely take broadcast staffing season seriously because we have writers who want to work there. And it's still like with 20 episode orders, that's still a lot of money too. And there's still good content coming out in broadcast too. So like a lot of great creatives and producers working there. So it's just because the market is continually shifted towards more streaming. It's become much more diverse kind of pacing everywhere and how everyone's ordering, renewing and all that stuff. So we have to kind of keep tabs on it. So it's really fascinating, but also stressful.
It is both exciting and
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly it.
Oh, awesome. All right. So this next question may be a little complicated, but maybe just for sake of simplicity, let's focus on broadcast staffing, and then we can get into the streaming and the cable and the more I don't want to say nebulous, but the more free-flowing schedules. So if a writer wants, to be like they want to go out for staffing jobs this year, they're working on some new samples, be they pilots, specs. I'll get into that question later. When would you guys recommend they would need to have, their portfolio ready to go?
I think one of the good things for most of the people that are probably looking at or asking that question, they're probably looking for a lower level staffing position. So one of the things where time kind of is on your side is the way that they staff is usually pretty top down, especially because they're trying to figure out how much money they have left in their budget. So they get their sort of big gets, which are the higher up people, the co-producers. By the time they're down looking at staff writers and story editors, you're more in like your May, June area. I think sometimes, as Danny mentioned, showrunners will start to fill up a room before they have their pilot pickup, and take a couple meetings around that time. But if they're for lower level people, it really is usually much closer to after the pilot has already been picked up. So in terms of when you want to have your sample finished, I think like you do have a little bit of time if you're sitting here right now with like, ooh, I have like a good first draft, but I really don't feel like I'm ready yet. I think you still have a good 6 weeks to get it into tip top shape. That being said, I definitely am a big proponent of you want to have your sample ready as early as possible. And that's not just because of staffing situations. I think like you never know when someone's going to reach out to you and be like, hey, like I loved meeting you at that, at that coffee shop today. I loved working with you in that mini room. Do you have a sample? And I think to just have a sample in your back pocket that you feel comfortable with is really important, and not just focusing on having that ready for staffing season.
Yeah, I agree with everything Charlotte said. But the answer to that is they should have it ready now. Just get ahead of it, because we're already talking to producers, execs, and showrunners on reading and stuff. And a lot of people tell us, we're focused on pre-production or stuff. Like a lot of showrunner assistants will start reading ahead of time. A lot of production execs will start taking names early on. You just want to get ahead of the 8 ball, because they'll say, we're not reading. And then all of a sudden they're reading. And it's better just get ahead of that, build that really, especially like some of these showrunner assistants, especially as an agent, because they know why you're calling. You want to build a good relationship with them and know you read their pilot, you're a fan of it, you want to give them target ideas. So we always want to get ahead of that as soon as possible. But to Charlotte's point, like they focus more at the upper level in terms of their budget and like how much the room, and like they'll go after their big names and upper levels, mid levels, because once those pickups happen like the week before upfronts, it's a madhouse to lock in a lot of these upper levels before they go into other shows. So even sometimes if like a show feels like it's going to get picked up, they'll send out if come offers ahead of time, thinking like, yeah, we're going to get picked up, but we really want you in our room. And then the lower level needs like will circulate even close to Memorial Day, like after the week of upfronts, because they're like, okay, how much money do we have? How many lower levels can we fit in here? And in terms of that. The other thing too to keep in mind why you want to get out early is because more and more in broadcast, we're seeing straight to series orders. So CBS picked up Walker to straight to series and Lincoln Lawyer, and then Superman and Lois at CW was a series pickup. So those are all actively staffing, and Superman and Lois might have already started, or at least a mini room. Lincoln Lawyer is currently in a mini room and will do an expansive room in we're in February, March, and then Walker's going to start meeting people within a couple weeks. In fact, we had a mid-level writer who's really sat out in broadcast, and she was already given an offer. And that's kind of a very anomaly situation, but they knew that like Superman and Lois also wanted her. So like they had to like throw that offer out early. So the pacing, even the broadcast now, like it's becoming a lot less structured. So always keep getting your material as ready as possible for whenever. And yeah.
You never know when that phone call is going to come. And then real quick, because I've heard you guys both mention like mini rooms. So just in case somebody's not familiar, what would be the difference between a mini room, other than its size, if there is a difference other than its size, from a regular room?
Mini rooms kind of defined a little differently depending on studio networks in terms of what it needs and like what they're going to do, but it's just like a shortened, it's not as full-fledged as a room, and they're not. It's kind of a cheap way for the networks to like not have to pay as much for a fully extended room, like 20-week minimum guaranteed. And usually like what will happen is like, it's like kind of like early development where a cable network like AMC like likes the script, but they want to get a sense of where that season kind of goes. They might put up a mini room with a showrunner and creator, if it's one and the same, and put together like maybe 3 to 5 writers to kind of put an outline together, maybe even work on the pilot a bit, and then submit that to the network to see if they want to approve to a full season order. And from then they'll break out a real writer's room. Well, they'll have at least 20 weeks or something like, or 10 weeks or something like that. And then they might add more rooms to help flesh out those episodes. Sometimes you'll see that with existing shows. Like I had a client on 13 Reasons Why for this final season, and it was going to more than likely get renewed. But they still had a mini room put together with like a couple upper levels, mid, and then like 3 staff writers where they, again, outlined the season, what it was going to look like, and then had it approved to Netflix before they were like, okay, well, here's the extended season order. So it's just kind of shortened way to kind of outline what the season is. A little bit of it is reactionary to the streamers doing full season orders and just kind of putting that money out there for full productions. Some places based off their budget models just want to kind of, it's a middle ground between development and a full series order in a way.
All right, cool. So question that I've gotten multiple times from writers, so I figure I would pose it to you guys, is how do reps, so agents, managers, lawyers, and or writers find out about open positions? Like, where is there a job posting somewhere? I'm fairly certain that's not the case, but.
Well, I can speak to the writer's side of things. For the biggest, I would say the biggest way that people find out about open positions is that you know someone or you worked with someone who is now staffing a room or is working on a room or is helping someone staff. One of the biggest reasons why I think you have a huge advantage if you are, and I don't want to jump into what I'm sure we'll talk about later, but where I think a big advantage comes in of being a writer who has worked as an assistant or who has worked in LA is getting to know other people, because I mean, 3 of the past jobs that I've gotten have been through people that I know, and it's much more common even when you are staffing through your reps to have your script really read and looked at and really considered. I think often comes with also having someone else that you've worked with and know vouching for you and bringing your script to the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and at least for our end, it's, we tend to divide the town by coverage. So you usually go by studio. So like, for example, I cover ABC Studios and CBS Studios, and then like Skydance, and then it kind of, based off vertical integration, that means I cover ABC and then Freeform and D+ and all this other stuff. So it's just, talking to our covering execs, the studios and networks and production companies, like at least every other week. And just checking in to see, getting ahead of time, like what's going on, where they looking to staff, and like what's going on. A lot of times too, if you see like deadline alerts that like Blacklist got renewed, we'll check in and see, and check in on that. But a lot of times too, when you hear about a series pick up a deadline, about a show getting picked up, it might already be staffed and the room might already be going. So I get a lot of texts and calls from clients who are like, hey, is this room going or staffed? I'm like, well, they were reading like 6 months ago on it, like when you were already in a room, so like it's a lot of that. So it's really important that like for us on our end on the representation side, that we cultivate our relationships with execs and make sure we're talking to them as frequently as we respectfully can, because they will start, even places like Lucasfilm and Marvel where the IP is so precious and they can't even tell us what the show is. I'll just be like, okay, so tell me like tonally, what type of show is it? So I can send you a general idea. And that formulates into something real. A few weeks later, like, okay, this is the property, this is what it is, and all that. So it's just getting ahead of it and making sure we talk to everyone in the industry.
All right, cool. And then, to follow along with this thread I've got here. So once a staffing job has been located, that's open, that, either you want to send a client in on, or you want to send yourself in on, what does that submission process look like? And I'm sure it's going to vary, but if as general as we can get, are we sending in original pilots these days? Are we sending in specs of different shows? if somebody only has a feature sample, but it's like the best feature ever and fits tonally with the showrunner, could you send that in?
These days, I think people are definitely prioritizing original pilots over specs. In the broadcast world with some of the more old school writers, I know that there are writers who love reading specs, but in general, I think if you're going to focus on writing one sample, I think you can get a lot more mileage out of an original pilot than you can a spec right now. Similarly, I've heard people who will read features. I think with a feature, if you're sending in a feature, it should probably be your second sample because you want to show people that you know how to write in the arc of television. And if you're sending in a feature, it probably is only because it really is a very similar subject matter or tone of the pilot that you're attempting to staff on. Another piece of advice that I've gotten, which I think is a really good piece of advice, is sending in a cover letter of sorts with your materials that really show a personal connection to why the show means something to you. I think 9 times out of 10 people would rather read that than a spec, just to see that, like, you know, a lot of people, a lot of managers, a lot of agents will submit 10 clients to one staffing position, and the showrunner's assistant who's fielding it is kind of like, well, now it doesn't feel like any of these people are right for it. And so for you to really differentiate yourself from the pack, writing something that adds on, you know, this is my personal connection with either this show or this topic.
Yeah, you definitely want an original pilot. I think that's more important. I think that was like 10, 15 years ago, you could have written a spec script. And I think the only reason I think like writers programs are ones that still ask for like a spec script, like WB program will ask for like a spec on a WB show. But to Charlotte's point, you want an original script. I think showrunners and creators want to see your unique point of view in storytelling. That's why on the representation side, it's not always important for us to, like, when we're finding new clients to read a script that, like, oh, we can sell this script, like this can develop. Like, obviously we have high hopes for our clients. We want them to be creatives and stuff, but sometimes if the script that we first are introduced to them with is not the most marketable at that time, if we love the writing and the voice comes out, it's like, okay, this is something that we can get you open writing assignment jobs and get you staffed on. So the original script is really important. With a feature sample, again, like Charlotte said, like, it's not as, I think you should focus on having a pilot script if you want to get staffed in television, but we've had clients with a feature script get staffed before. It's not as frequent, but it's because the script is either phenomenal and is a knockout and really showcases the writer's voice really well, and also is very relevant to what the show is. So I had a young writer who's now doing phenomenal, but only like a year and a few change from now. She only had a feature script, but it was really, it was very reminiscent of a show that's coming out on Apple, and the showrunner read it and loved it and brought her in as a staff writer. So it can happen. And especially with television kind of becoming very different in what it is, it's not just like half-hour sitcoms, hour-long dramas. It's becoming a lot of, the genres and tones are changing, and some things even look like extended features. That could change a lot in a couple of years too. Yeah. On top of that,
Sorry, go ahead.
You're seeing poets, you're seeing playwrights getting staffed too at the staff writer. That's another thing, is traditional TV writers are getting a lot more competition at the lower level with playwrights, and we staff people off of their playwriting script material. So, yeah.
Another thing I think to think about when you're looking at the materials that you might be submitting, if you have a very non-traditional original pilot, writing a spec of a very, more broadcasty show to show people that you really understand the 3-act structure can be a really good supplement to have. And similarly, if you have a very straightforward broadcasty original pilot and you want to write a spec about a show that kind of breaks the form a little bit, I think that can be a good way to, again, get good mileage out of having, 2 samples. I think having, two original pilots that are both very good, but are both network pilots and very similar, I don't know if that's going to be as helpful for you as if you had, something that can just show, hey, here's a second sample of this other thing that I can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like show a little bit of range.
Yeah.
Well, while still within the same, genre and format we want to be in.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I love it. And then this is another one of those questions that I get asked all of the time. Are there unrepped writers. So for sake of argument, we'll say have neither agent, manager, nor attorney, who end up by some, luck and cosmic Twitter magic, getting staffed in a room. And if so, how common might that be?
The people that I have worked with who got hired as staff writers who did not get hired through representation or are unwrapped are either people who started as an assistant and got that promotion, which I think can be a wonderful way to get your foot in the door, or people who through the only people that I've worked with on shows that were unwrapped were people who got hired through knowing the showrunner. So someone that they worked with on a different project that maybe wasn't a TV show. I know someone who worked on like a play with with the showrunner, and that's how they ended up on it together. A family friend, but yeah, I think the best way to get into a room if you are unwrapped is through either an assistant position, or I'm a big proponent of some of the programs that Danny mentioned before. Warner Brothers has a program, Disney has a program, Nickelodeon has a program, and I think those are really, really helpful ways to get your foot in the door of a writer's room.
Yeah, CBS program will like move tooth and nail to make sure you're repped. Like they will you're staffed. Like every year, the program, like those writers always get staffed. Like they just put them in the room and they make the budget work. So yeah, it's writers get staffed, but like Charlotte said, it's usually through a connection or because the material speaks in some way to the show. I wouldn't say it's common. I mean, because there's over like 530 original shows now, I couldn't tell you statistically what percentage of it is. I would say it's still probably more representation in some way, but it may not necessarily have been because of representation, So sometimes it is because they were rep before, but the reps knew that because the showrunner assistant, they were a showrunner assistant, they were going to get staffed, or because they were a playwright and like Charlotte said, like they worked with them previously. So it can happen in tandem with representation or not. But that staff writer position is incredibly competitive and in my opinion, very diluted. There's like a lot of people going after it. So it's just it comes from every direction, whether it's representation or personal connection or you hustling and stuff. So yeah.
I think one thing that really is helpful about representation that can also be found in other ways is that that's the person who's really pushing for you and can call up the showrunner's assistant and be like, you really need to read this pilot. So if there are other ways that you can kind of address that connection in some way, whether it be a cover letter or someone who knows someone who knows someone, I think those are the best ways to sort of address the not having representation.
Yeah. It's always good to have an advocate.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we've been kind of nodding to this question a little bit, but let's just go ahead and ask it. So for writers wanting to be staffed on a show, do you recommend that they attempt to be involved in a room to some degree, either as an assistant, writer's PA, maybe if they have some kind of specialized knowledge, like they're, Navy Special Forces and it's the Navy SEAL show, they try to get in that way, just to have some experience with writers' rooms prior to seeking that staff writer position?
They can. I mean, like Charlotte mentioned it before, like if a lot of times writer assistants get promoted, a lot of writers PA can move into the room as well and become promoted. It's not guaranteed, I will say. Like, I think, there can be politics internally or budget regions where it just won't happen. You can wait season after season and then you're just like, okay, what's going on here? But then there's a lot of situations where the showrunners are known for promoting internally, depending on how much impact you have in the room and stuff. So I would say if you are lucky to get a writer assistant job or showrunner assistant job, writer's PA job, you should definitely go for it if you're a writer and that's what you want to do. But you still have to put in the work as a writer and try to get representation, try to network and meet as many people as possible. Because I've had clients who have been writer assistants and gotten promoted through their rooms, but I've had just as many, if not more, writers who were not staffed who just have really good material. And you get it out to everybody, and you get them in front of producers and studios, and there's a lot of people. These shows get staffed regardless, that's the thing. And so you as an agent on my end, you have to know the studio execs, the producers who are actually active and excited about young voices. And like, for them, it's like, okay, if I bring this young voice in here, we can cultivate them on our shows and then develop with them. And that looks good for me. So it's like, you want to find those type of execs and producers who want to find fresh voices, so that when they do staff shows, they're also pushing on their end. That happens a lot too. So it's not all end all be all, like I have to be a writer's assistant. It can be super helpful to do that, but it's not guaranteed that you'll get staff from that.
Yeah, I think that's like the thing that I think is the best thing about this like industry as a whole, and also the absolute worst thing about this industry as a whole, is there isn't one set path. It's not like, you know, you do the 4 years of medical school and then you have your rotation program. It's not sort of this well-worn steps. I think the positive of that is, you know, there are people who want to get a staff writer position who maybe are working as a teacher right now and have a couple kids, and taking a writer's PA job isn't as realistic as it was when I took my writer's PA job when I was just out of college and was very happy to bring people coffee all day. And so I think that when you say, you know, when there are questions like, you know, do you have to be an assistant? There is no end all be all, as Danny is saying. I have a little bit more strong of an opinion. It's definitely my bias, which is I think that if you are able to work one of those jobs and you are able to get one of those jobs, I think it is very helpful. The biggest reason why is what we've been talking about before, which is if you are unrepped, it's the best way to meet a huge number of people in the industry. My first staffing job I got because a woman that I had worked with previously asked me to do like punch up on her pilot and was like really happy with with the jokes that I had pitched. And so that only happened because she and I had met, and I had met her when I was a writer's PA, and she just needed a little extra help. The other second side of being an assistant that I think is so helpful is I have worked in a bunch of rooms before where people come in and they haven't really had as much room experience, and they're A, overwhelmed by it, or B, accidentally break some unwritten rules. I'm not trying to like be in any way like scary, because ultimately I think people just want everyone to succeed. But I do think that there are some sort of like unwritten rules of the writer's room of etiquette that if you have the chance to sort of sit back and observe in the role of an assistant, you can learn so much and you can kind of save yourself a little bit of heartache later. Another reason why I think being an assistant is an amazing first step is I think that when you come, you know, when you have the sense of what you think you want to do. A woman that I worked with was an assistant, and now she writes just essays for the New Yorker because she realized she didn't really like being in a writer's room. She didn't like working with people to the extent that she had to every day. And so I think that's another thing, is it can save you a lot of time of experiencing what it looks like to really be on a TV show and see if it is a job that you think you would want to do for the long term.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. I love it. And so another question that I get asked all of the time, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to pose it to you guys because you are the experts. In order to be staffed, do writers have to either live in LA or be able to live in LA? Like they've got a friend whose couch they can crash on for the duration of the room.
Yeah, I think, again, I wouldn't say like it's mandatory you live in LA, but I mean, if this is your career that you want to, you know, writing career is like, it's not a hobby, it's a full-time job. It's a career that you invest a lot of time and blood, sweat into. So if you are based out of, you know, I'm from Indiana. If you're based out of Indiana, you know, just know that there is like thousands of other people who are going after the same jobs you are, who are based out of here, networking and talking. And like Charlotte said, like working with all these people day to day, face to face. And if they're staffing a room and they start next week and the showrunner wants to meet you tomorrow, you're going to have a lot better impression meeting them in person than a Skype session. They're wondering, so what are you doing day to day? Like, what is your job? Like, what is your career? And you're like, oh, I'm in Indiana. Like, I don't know what a room looks like. I don't know what the pacing is. It's not the best look, you know? I would say maybe if you were based out of New York, you can get away with it. And there's definitely New York rooms, and, you know, we'll have LA writers, but we'll tell New York rooms that they're willing to relocate. That's the only way I would say that you can get away with that. Yeah, this is a full-time career and job. And so people want to know that you're out here networking and hustling and stuff. And like, that's really important if you want to get staffed. Development, you know, that's a different conversation. If that's your priority, if you're maybe older in your career, have a family somewhere, like that's a different conversation. But if you're young and bustling and hustling, and you should be in LA putting your time in.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, as Danny said, there's some New York, there's a little bit in Atlanta, and there's a little bit in Canada, but it's to his point, like he said there's like 530 shows or something this year, and there's a billion people that are trying to get those staff writer positions, and if you are in LA, you're one of a billion trying to get 500 jobs, and if you're in New York, you're looking at 20 jobs. If you're in Atlanta, you're looking at 3 jobs. If you're in Canada, you're looking at 7 jobs. So it's just like it is, as he said so eloquently and perfectly, like, do you believe in yourself? Are you betting on yourself to do this job? If so, like, part of that, unfortunately, is move to LA, commit to it. I've worked on a couple shows where people like really moved the day of, I got hired on a Thursday, moved to LA on a Friday. But in that case, like it just is, I think it is really both of the cases that I know, those people were so specifically the fit for the show where it was kind of like, all right, this makes sense. Otherwise, I just think it's making a very hard thing even harder for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, those were the questions that I had prepared. So let's get into some writer questions. And then writers, if we cannot get to all of your questions, we apologize in advance, but we are going to do our best. So please bear with us. Okay, cool. There's a lot of these. Okay. Where do I want to start? Okay, cool. So here's a good one to start with. So Betty asks, I'm interested in learning what a staff writer and story editor does in the room and out of the room. What is their job description? I think also, what's the difference between the two?
The difference between a staff writer and a story editor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The difference between all the writing positions are, in terms of a day-to-day, are actually almost negligible. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just within those jobs, it is a very hierarchical job. The idea being, as a staff writer, you should probably think about contributing 1 to 2 times a day, whereas as all the way up to co-EP, you're running the room. So in terms of the difference between a staff writer and a story editor, it's really just the title difference. There's a financial difference, and then how much you're expected and encouraged to contribute.
Yeah, some rooms ask you demand different responsibilities from you depending on the size of the room, and like Charlotte said, in terms of the hierarchy, in terms of upper, mid, lower, like, is it more upper focused? Is it more spread out? So if it's like 5 upper levels and you're 1 staff writer, you might be doing a lot more of the outlines, character breakdowns, and stuff like that. It just depends on the rooms and what the size is and what they're asking, the showrunner's asking from you.
All right, cool. And then Shannon is asking, how many scripts should I have in my portfolio when going out for these?
Just television?
Yeah, let's just focus on television.
If you have 1 really good TV script, that could be it. I have one writer who we met when we were coordinators still, and she was a coordinator at YouTube, and she had a really good half-hour sample, and that got her staffed on the last 3 shows. It got her a feature writing assignment job. It got her 2 development projects in TV. She's still writing other stuff, and we would encourage you to keep writing and write a feature and write a couple of TV and try to push yourself in different genres. But theoretically, if you have 1 knockout sample, that could really do it for you. And the funny thing is, it's not just at the lower level. We joke that there's showrunner upper level people who've just been staff for 10, 15 years, and their last script is like from 2005. And they're like,
yeah, absolutely.
I haven't written new samples since then. It's like, just look at my credits. That's what we submit. So, yeah. So that's it.
At a certain point, like if you've run a TV show for 3 years, that becomes your writing sample.
Right. Yeah, you're not gonna ask Chuck Lorre for a writing sample. It's like, okay, I know what Chuck Lorre is. So yeah.
Like, we just send a link to
yeah. Oh, it just is a piece of paper that says, I'm Chuck Lorre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, cool. So Jerry is asked, and I think I'm interpreting this correctly, Jerry, but correct me if I'm not. He's asking about formatting when submitting a pilot for staffing, and whether or not to include the act breaks and sort of the traditional like broadcast, teaser, act 1, act 2, tag, or for dramas, more acts. Is that format still something that people do? And then he's also asking, should we have a pitch deck ready to go?
For traditional staffing, I definitely don't think that you need a pitch deck. I don't know anyone who would read a pitch deck just because they're going through so many samples. I think it's just extra material for them. In terms of the 3-act format, I think there's broadcast scripts, and then there's streaming cable scripts. Most streaming and cable scripts don't have the 3-act structure, and most broadcast scripts do. So if you are sending your script if you're trying to get staffed on a broadcast show, I think it is better to have the 3-act structure. But I got staffed on a broadcast show with a cable. I think Danny will probably say what he has been saying, which I completely agree with, which is at the end of the day, like, the script is the king. If it's an amazing script, it doesn't really matter. But I definitely think that having that 3-act structure written out for people, making it very obvious that you know how to write an act break, is a great thing.
Yeah, I've been getting this question a lot more, so I feel like there's a lot of that discussion between writers about, like, oh, the way Netflix is now, and you even see something like Mandalorian, which seems like it's the death of writers, just like the way it paces and looks at stuff. Like, I think if you're trying to break into TV screenwriting in this creative driven era where things like Succession, you are very comedically driven, but it's an hour long, or Dead to Me, which Liz Feldman came from sitcoms, but is a half-hour drama almost. It's still very creative driven, but that doesn't mean you can just have like a hour-long stream of conscious, And a 3-act structure is when you're breaking out and people are being introduced to you as a writer and your voice. It's really important that you put it in a structure that people are familiar with and understand, whether it's broadcast, streaming, or cable. Again, we've had people get staffed off plays. We've had people get staffed off features. It's just like, if it's creatively driven and your confident voice comes out, then that's great. But in the traditional sense, if you're a TV writer, really focus on a 3-4-act structure type of thing, because that's how people are still gauging viability of TV writers. So.
Cool. All right. And so a few writers have asked similar questions. So I'm going to sort of combine them into one mega question, if you will. And that is, what do writers do if they write across genre? So maybe they love comedy, but they also really love like high octane Jack Ryan style thrillers.
Just have multiple scripts. Yeah, I have a drama script. I have a cable script. I have a broadcast script. If you're interested in different things, I think it's good to show those interests, because you don't have to send your broadcast comedy script to every single place you apply. If you're trying to staff on a drama show, you should have a good drama script ready to show, as much as if you're trying to staff on a broadcast comedy, you should have a broadcast script.
Yeah, and as reps, like, if we're passionate about our clients, we're reading all their materials. So when there's a show that comes out, we're like, okay, like, we should use the hour long for this. Or again, we have to read this material now, because an hour long doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an hour long drama. There could be a lot of levity to it, a lot of humor to it. So it's like, we've seen situations where, like, okay, let's send a half-hour dramedy of hers or his and use that for staffing, because that's what they're looking for. And that's what they're asking. So again, I keep saying it, but like, a lot of things are genre blending now. So we sometimes have to think outside the box in terms of staffing. But if you have an hour-long thriller and you have a half-hour comedy, that's great. Just make sure your reps or whoever you're submitting knows what sample to use for which type of shows. Yeah.
All right, cool. So follow-up question to that from Miss Phoebe. She is asking, does anyone ever ask to read more than one script? And if so, is it all right if it's a different genre?
Yeah, in my experience, people sometimes ask to read a second script if they either like really liked your interview but didn't, or if they like you as a writer, some of your credits, but don't love or don't totally feel the fit in the script that they read. But no one, if your first script, quote unquote, does the job, they're not asking for another one.
Yeah, it happens. It definitely happens every so often. It actually happened on Friday, and I was like, "Did she have a second script? I don't know. I have to ask her and figure that out." But don't rely on that. I would just say you want to have, again. They're reading a lot. They're reading. My friends who are showrunner assistants, they're gritting a lot of material coming in, and like Charlotte said, like when agents are submitting 5 people per level, like we have to be very targeted what we're submitting. We have to like pitch people exactly why we're submitting them for certain shows. So we have to be respectful of other people's time. Otherwise they won't read any of our material, our clients' material. So we try to go with one script that is like, that makes the most sense, or is the knockout, like this is their voice. This is why it makes sense for this show. So it can happen asking for a second sample for a lot of reasons Charlotte said, but rely on just, you have one shot and one script to send.
Yeah. And I think to that point, what people do say, which is a little scary but probably true, is I know a lot of people probably will read the first act of something, maybe the final 10 pages of something, but they just, I mean, when you're staffing, you're reading hundreds of scripts, and it is really hard to get through them all.
Yeah, and look, especially like when we're reading for, from my end, it's like I'm not always reading to say, okay, can I shop this script? Sometimes if I want to invest in a client, it's like, is the writing good? And, I feel like even I'm at a point now where it's like I can read 20, 30 pages of a script and be like, okay, this writer knows how to pace, they know how to introduce a concept, the series and stuff. You don't necessarily need to read the whole script to know that.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean, I just don't want everyone here to like go off and say, okay, the first 20, 30 pages, I got to front load a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
You should write it at the pace you want to write it. But just again, people can discern whether you're a solid enough writer or ready for it to be staffed within 30, 20 pages.
But if you're trying to staff on a comedy and your jokes don't start until act 2, that's probably not going to be the thing that really puts your best foot forward.
Yeah, if it's like, if it totally just jumps into something different, then they're like, okay, what show am I watching? And then that's a red flag for them.
The other thing I get a lot from people is I'll read someone's script and talk to them about it, and they'll have these great ideas that they'll be like, oh yeah, well that happens in episode 2. And I completely agree with Danny. Don't overload your thing, and don't mess up the pacing just to shove too much stuff in there. But there is no episode 2. You're probably not selling this sample. So if you have a great idea, a really fun twist, it shouldn't be the twist at the end of the finale of season 1, because the odds of that existing are very slim. It should be the final twist of the first act or the third act. Make sure you get your good ideas in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff we could talk about in terms of this that I've noticed, but yeah, it just, you need that sample just has to read well. That's all.
Do a good sample. Have a good sample, and you'll be okay.
Have a good sample, you'll be fine. No problem.
Okay, cool. So Ryan is asking if you guys have any advice for securing a writer's assistant position if you are based out of New York.
There's shows in New York that have writer, and they'll obviously need writer assistant jobs. There's also productions in New York that you could be script coordinator on, or writer's PA, or below the line, that you can find your way up into it. But like Charlotte said, there's not as many productions as there are in LA. But there's shows in New York that are based out of there for which reasons. Maybe it's because it's from a playwright showrunner or something like that. But
some of the late night shows are there.
Yeah, a lot late night sketch, but that process to get a writer's assistant job is, like Charlotte said, it's kind of a crapshoot between just as much as LA is. Like, we've had assistants at agencies who've gone on to writer assistants, or we've had people who were execs at other companies became writer assistants. So that process, I wouldn't say, is any different than if you're in LA or New York. It's just not as much.
Yeah, I think the best way to get a writer assistant job, I think, is almost as hard as getting a staff writer job. Like, it is, I would say, in order to get that, something to think about is looking a little bit lower down. So a writer's PA job, an office PA job, I think those are great ways to get your foot in the door. And then also starting in an agency, if that is a culture that you think that you could thrive, survive in. And there are a bunch of different agencies. It doesn't have to be one of the big three or four. It can be, there's more of a culture fit that you can be a little bit more picky with. But I do think getting a job on a desk at an agency, definitely, if you do that first year, can help you a lot with those opportunities, those assistant job opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially because, and that's the other point I think we're trying to get across. You don't need to be a writer assistant to get staffed on your first job. Again, a lot of my young writers who were never staffed before, who I signed without being staffed, most of them were not writer assistants in the past. They just had a great sample and we networked them out there. So it's like, I throw out, it's not, it's a made up statistic, but it's like television is like 10% networking and 90% you're writing, like the 10% is really important. You should be networking, but if your script doesn't showcase your voice and your writing isn't good, you're just fitting wheels in the dirt, and you could go from one writer assistant job to another. So yeah, but having said that, I think working at agency is really helpful. Like most people just do a year and then they move off somewhere else. But why it's such a great first job starting into the industry is because we talk to everybody. We're talking to every network, we're talking to every studio, every production company, all of our clients who are also writers and directors. So we're getting a lot of information coming in and we know a lot of this pacing and stuff, but then our assistants can go off and work for a director client or a writer client or work at a studio and then go into a writer assistant job. Because I feel like studios are the people who hear about the open writing assistant jobs first. It's not something we even source, but studios always know when those things come up the most. So that's a good place to start if you're young and you're willing to work for a little pay in a stressful environment. So yeah.
Oh, all right, cool. So Keith is asking, I'll sort of condense and simplify this. If somebody is newer to writing, maybe they're coming to writing from another career, and are, working to break in and building networks and is there, additional things that they could do? Like, finding out when these networking events are and going to them and meeting people and polishing their samples. Like, should they be submitting for contests? And if so, which ones are important? And, should they be like holding live reads of their scripts? And, what are some other things that they can be doing to supplement their building of their career?
Yeah, I don't think anything hurts you. So if something works for you and feels good, like definitely I think putting energy into those places is good. I think of the things that you mentioned, I think contests can be really helpful. The ATX pitch competition, I know a couple people who have gotten staffed through that. And then also another thing that I think is helpful these days is if you have the time and the energy and either the money or the favors that people are willing to give you, make a short and submit it to festivals. I think that's another path that you can go down these days. There are people who are making shorts that are interesting, that catch someone's eye at a festival, and you can get representation through that, or you can even get a job somewhere, depending on what festival it is.
Yeah, and we're reading all the finalists and quarterfinalists in programs. We're following people on Instagram, on Twitter. We're just trying to find unique voices and point of views where they're coming from. So if you're getting yourself out there and your material is getting recognition, then the exposure is really helpful. Submit
your feature to the Blacklist. Every single year that I worked as an assistant at a production company, I was reading the Blacklist scripts just to see if any of them were worth optioning or if the writing was good and worth bringing that writer in. Yeah. Even I had a writer who is had her feature on the Young and Hungry list, and a showrunner read it and brought her on as a writer's trainee. So it just, like Charlotte said earlier, there's no one way to break in, and that should be a comforting thing. Honestly, it makes it hectic and crazy and all that and uncertain, but that's the good thing is you just got to keep pushing in and getting your material out there, in different ways. And find the path that works for you. For some people, working at an agency just is not something that they can handle. Fine, find a different way to do it. Do stand up at night, whatever that thing is that works for you. And, Danny said before, this is a career, it's not a hobby, but it's also one of those careers that if you're pursuing, you probably love it, or go be an accountant. My God, it's so unstable. And so if you do love it, like find the thing about it that you love and figure out more and more and more ways to do it and enjoy that experience. And then I think the success will come with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. So similar question. And I believe that all of everything that you've just said could also apply to this question, but I just want to make sure if there's any other info that we can give them whenever writers are looking for reps, specifically agents and managers, because lawyers, you can, you just hire them like on a retainer. It's a little bit different. What are, in addition to, contests and all that, what are some things for writers to keep in mind when trying to get on a rep's radar without crossing into the scary stalker weird territory?
I think like we're saying, just getting your material out there and exposed, and you could get staffed on a show and then be introduced to an agent. And I think it's still helpful then to find someone that can get you out of that network that you're already in a bubble with and exposed. And then if you're in writers programs, like we're reading a lot of those, even if you're building relationships with certain execs who are fans of your writing, they believe in you, they're going to start introducing your material to reps to check out. So it could even happen from that direction. Like I've had exec friends who have introduced me to writers that I was huge fans of. And again, even if you were an assistant at an agency, one of my biggest clients used to be an assistant at an agency, and another one has there's a top of my head, there's one who has like a deal at 20th, who used to be an assistant at Gersh. Like it just comes from all different directions, and there's no writers programs, being introduced to execs and other writer assistants and stuff. Just like if your material is good and people are going to want to meet you, no matter where you are. Like Charlotte said, I was an intern at a management company, and I had to track not just finalists on Nichols and all this, but quarterfinalists, semifinalists, top 15%. And I had to read all those stuff. And no matter where they were based out of, if the script was good and I liked it, I flagged it for the managers, and then they would want to read them if they were good, So if your material is standing out, people are going to want to get to know you and give you recognition and all that. So.
Cool. So have good material, make friends, get it out there. Don't be crazy.
You could be a little crazy, honestly. We're all it's a stressful job, but there's a bit of fun to it. So that's the thing. It's we kind of become divas with a lot of the work we do, but my family all works in hospital. We're not doing we're not doing surgery. We're not in politics shipping soldiers off to war, but we still make it it's the same stakes. So there's a little bit of crazy to it. The networking thing, you break in and you do as much as you can in terms of going to networking events and meeting as many people as you can. But it always comes down to material. It really does.
I think a casual follow-up, in terms of the crazy, not crazy scale, a casual follow-up is a good thing because people are busy. If someone responded to your first email and you sent a second one and they never got back to you, a couple weeks later, send that follow-up, be nice about it. I think the biggest thing that I've seen that comes across just bad is asking for things that aren't being offered. If someone is nice enough to read your script and get coffee with you and give you notes, don't then ask them at the coffee to staff you because they know that that's what you want. And I think those things become really off-putting because you put someone in a really bad position. They want to be helpful. They feel like they've been helpful. And then all of a sudden now they have to reject you on something. And that I think it's those things that I feel get more put in the bad case. Whereas if you send a nice follow-up email with a little joke in it, maybe not a joke that is trying to be your spec of look how funny I am, but just a nice little considerate, this is super light thing. I think those things are appreciated.
Yeah, that's a really good point because if I'm talking to a writer or if someone brings up that they're a writer or a director, I know I'm already gauging if there's viability or if I want to build a relationship. It's being coy or upfront about it. It's yeah, I know, so it's I'm always being talked to by writers and directors trying to send me material and flirting with me with that stuff. So I'm used to dealing with that day to day, and not in a flippant way where I'm dismissive, but more of okay, I'll read your material and I'll check it out and see what that looks like and see if we want to build a relationship, or if you want feedback, I'll give you feedback. But if I see something potential, if there's potential here, I'll let you know. I'm not just gonna be like, okay, good luck to you, you know? Like, I will want to talk to you about that. Like, I'll talk about, okay, maybe we need to find a showrunner for this or something like that. So um, we're kind of used to that. And at the same time, like, we deal with that too from the buyer end as well, like as reps, you know, like we're setting material to them, we're setting our best clients to them to staff, or our best material to sell. And if we don't get feedback immediately, or if we don't hear back initially, like, we also have to be respectful, the way Charlotte said, checking in, maybe calling and stuff. Sometimes we're a little more aggressive with it because they'll get bombarded with material and there's certain timelines we have to follow, but they also know what we're calling about. You know, they know when an agent's calling, we're going to be peddling our clients, you know, and pushing for certain things. So we all play that dance at different various levels or directions, you know? So yeah, it's just like it's a simple check-in and follow-up maybe every couple of weeks, like in 2 weeks, or thank you letter or call or email. I mean, but they know
Yeah.
what you're asking about.
Just to jump on that, Danny, like definitely send a thank you email. Like I think like and it's just because my mom harped it into me. Like I always send a thank you, and now it's not like I'm on the other side of it, but having some people come to me and like how it does feel kind of weird to not just get like some sort of like, hey, I know you took, an hour out of your day and that wasn't easy to talk to me on the phone and we've never met before or whatever. Like just send a thank you email.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Gracious acts are accepted graciously. Okay, cool. So on that thread, Jan asks, can you give us tips on do's and don'ts when we get a meeting with a showrunner?
In terms of do's and don'ts, I mean, when you get a meeting with a showrunner, you want to, they just want to, the main thing that they want, honestly, is if you're at the point where you are meeting with a showrunner, they like your script and they so badly want to staff you at that point because they just want to be done. They're so exhausted. They've read so many scripts. And it's very similar to like Sorority Rush of just like, they've talked to so many people that day. If you can go in, be pleasant, prove to them that you are not going to be a problem to work with. Like the thing that I think people don't fully understand about being in a writer's room is you are basically in a meeting with your coworkers for 12 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. And it is a lot of time to be with people. So when I talk to my friends who are showrunners who are staffing and they're like, yeah, to be honest, I loved her script, but she came in and it felt like she was just going to be a lot in the room. So I think it's the same as any sort of coffee. It's a first date. You want to walk in, you want to put your best foot forward. You want to be respectful without being self-deprecating. I think a tip is be really familiar with what you're meeting on, especially if you're meeting on a couple things. You don't want to mix up, which show you're working for right now. I think also being familiar with that person's prior work, look them up on IMDb and just like have a sense of, oh, they worked on this show that I really liked when I was a kid. I'm just going to casually try to bring that up in the meeting. I think, again, like balancing that like creepy, not creepy moment. I like to do a quick Google search, get familiar with who the person is. And if there's something that I know we have in common, figure out a way to kind of casually bring that up. And oh my God, no way. Like you do half marathons too. That's so crazy. I had no idea. And then you can kind of have that conversation. But just remember, like the gist of it is they're just trying to get a good personality fit.
Yeah, it's like Charlotte said, it's like interviewing, if you're being interviewed for whatever job, they've already looked at your resume and thought you're qualified, so they're meeting you to see if you're a good chemistry fit, you're going to fit in the culture, and like you're on the same wavelength of what they're looking to do. So if you're getting a showrunner meeting, that's amazing because it means your material, your writing, your voice came out, your material is there, and it's on par with what they're looking for. So you should go in with that confidence. But it's a little bit of reading the room because not every showrunner is going to be confident and loud. Some are a little awkward. Some writers are awkward, if you didn't know that, and some don't always showcase their emotions on their sleeves the way other people are. They're human beings. So you don't necessarily want to go in there and try to be someone you're not. You want to just be yourself. And the same way they're reading you within the first few minutes, like you need to kind of read the room as well and not be too aggressive or too shy. Like you just want to be yourself, confident, like ask her questions. And as you get a sense of what type of person this is, you can open up on stuff. And like Charlotte said, go in with as much back information as you can. Like when we send clients in for short meetings, we're sending them with as much prep as possible. We're sending them credits on them, any material that they should look at ahead of time. If it's for a season 3, we'll get them links for the first 2 seasons to check out. We definitely will get them the most updated production draft of the pilot, because they definitely need to read that before they go in. Because they might throw questions like, where do you see the show going? Or what do you think of the last couple seasons? Where do you see these characters going? And you want to just be ready for that if they bring it up. You know, you don't want to just sit down and just start reciting all this stuff, because then you come off too rigid and robotic, but you want to see how that dialogue is going in the room, and you have this confidence in the back head twofold, that A, my writing speaks for itself and they already like it, and B, if they ask certain things about the show itself or the environment here, I can be ready to deal with that and handle that.
Yeah, if you're meeting on a 7-season comedy, obviously it's like hard to say that you're going to watch every single episode of 7 seasons, but it's really bad to go in there and pitch a storyline that they already did. So just really making sure you're familiar with that kind of stuff. I also think something that was helpful advice for me is, if you are going to meet as an assistant on something, dress up, wear a suit. If you're meeting as a writer on something, don't wear a suit. I think it seems like that just comes across weirdly, because
people wear suits for writer assistant jobs.
I think, maybe you don't have to do a suit. I think for an agency position, definitely a suit. If you're going in for, like, when I got my first writer's position job, I wore like a very professional dress. But maybe it was with sneakers, I think it is LA or it is just television. It's definitely more casual. But I think if you're going in as an assistant and you walk in like, a polo shirt, I think it kind of comes across a little bit cocky. Whereas I think if you're going as a writer, you want to dress like your more peers than coming in like on sort of a lower status level where the showrunner's wearing a zip-up sweatshirt and you're wearing a suit.
Yeah. Oh man, that's crazy. That's a hilarious mental image, by the way.
I know, yeah. It's such a funny thing too, because it feels a little counterproductive. You would think like, oh, just go in as professional as possible, but yeah.
It's just another element of like matching the style and matching the tone of what you're going in for.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So speaking of styles and tones, Crystal has a question about submitting a sample for staffing. She has a sample that happens to be kind of crime, gritty, premium cable drama. And she's worried that submitting a sample, which is different from the show that she might want to staff on, like maybe she wants to staff on an hour drama, but not nearly that gritty crime. Like maybe it's This Is Us versus The Wire or something. Okay, I'm getting off track. So do you feel that submitting a sample that is totally opposite of the show you're submitting for can hurt you or possibly help you? Maybe that is just the fresh air they need.
I mean, yeah, if your material doesn't speak to the show, then on to the next one. But at the same time, like if they might be asking for different things depending on what the needs are, maybe if it's a comedy show, maybe they need more people who can write about, if it's crime in the backdrop, maybe they need people who can write crime. If it's an hour long with comedic elements, maybe they need more joke writers in the room, so it could be a lot of different factors potentially. Even This Is Us, if it's a more serialized show, but it's still very character driven and it's like a genre backdrop, they might potentially go for that, but again, if you have a gritty crime thriller hour long, it probably doesn't make sense for This Is Us, and you got to be realistic about what type of shows you're going out for. And if you don't feel like the shows that you want to be staffed on is reflective of your script, then you got to write a new sample, and like Charlotte said, have multiple scripts.
All right, cool. All right, so here's an interesting question. From a digital presence perspective, what things are important to make available? The writer says on your personal website, but I'll expand it to maybe like a resume or, that cover letter that you send in. So like as an actor, I heard this a lot that, they wanted us to have an Instagram presence and a YouTube presence and a Facebook presence and does that kind of stuff matter for writers?
The biggest thing that I've seen right now is if you are like semi-famous on Twitter, that definitely there's an interest there. And so, especially for comedy rooms, if you are writing good jokes on Twitter that have got you a bit of a following, that can be really helpful. But I've also heard people going onto people's Twitter, loving their sample, going onto their Twitter and being like, these jokes are bad, and not wanting to hire someone. So I don't think, personally, I've never seen someone's personal website help with getting staffed as a writer. Danny can speak to if that helps you get representation maybe, but I do think that if you are a joke writer and you feel confident about your jokes, like throw some jokes on Twitter and see what happens and follow people. But I definitely don't think that the online presence thing is the thing that is getting you staffed.
Yeah, like Charlotte said, comedy shows, joke heavy places, like when we submit our stand-up writer clients for those shows, we'll usually include a Twitter handle if we think they're genuinely funny and they have a good, if they have a good following behind it, you know? Or sometimes we'll even like we'll cherry pick certain ones that like got a lot of responses or were hilarious and just kind of curate that on like a PDF doc and attach that, you know? We'll do stuff like that. And we have also some writers who they just wrote a really good short that like got them into programs or won festivals, and we'll include that with our blurb and we'll highlight as well with the sample. So those things can help and accentuate it. And sometimes that could be what helps you get staffed. But I would say it's any material that we supplement beyond the script, because that's still, I think, the biggest factor, is still creatively driven stuff. You know, I think like a resume type of thing, I don't know is as effective. You know, I think if anything, it'd be like a Twitter handle or a short that we would include with the blurb, stuff like that. Was that the question? Was that what you?
Yeah. If we didn't answer that question, writer who was anonymous, please ask a follow-up. Okay, cool. So while we are waiting to see if that happens, Jan asks, what are some of those unwritten rules of the staff room, the room?
The biggest and most important one is respecting the hierarchy and not talking when you are not supposed to be talking. But I also think things like going off on funny stories. One of the most important thing that I can impart onto writers is like lower level writers, is that you're going to see co-EPs and the upper level writers do stuff that will get them a lot of attention and positive reactions, and you're going to think like, oh, I should do those things as well, and unfairly you should not be doing those things. And so there are times where a co-EP will, you know, start telling this very long funny story from their childhood that the whole room is laughing and obsessed with, and the second you start to tell yours, it's like, whoa, what are you doing? And I think it's things like that that can kind of be like you learn the wrong lesson by watching older people. So I think the biggest thing as a staff writer, it's very hard to find that balance between not talking enough and talking too much. So the biggest piece of advice that I would have is when you're in the big room, the main room, there's a lot of people in there, really take a step back as much as possible. Use, you know, time at lunch to bond with people and tell more of those social stories. And then when you're in smaller rooms, because rooms will often break off into, you know, B rooms, smaller rooms, outline rooms, those are times where I think as a lower level writer, you can step forward a little bit more. So I think that's a really important one. Yeah, I think anything that takes the air out of the room, there's a lot of pressure in a writer's room. I've never been in a writer's room that wasn't behind. And so I think that in those moments when people are scrambling, the last person they want to hear from is the lower level writer. Even if you have, you know, the perfect fix or the perfect solution, wait until there's a lull, wait until there's a time where you can kind of swoop in and pitch something. Especially when it comes to jokes, people are dying for someone to come in with that funny joke that can cause everyone to move on. But wait and take a step back for that time.
All right, cool. So Shannon has a question. You know, so she's out there like hustling herself, trying to get meetings, make connections, make friends, get her material out there. Who should she be trying to get to know to be read? The showrunner's assistant, coffee, producers, development people, or the showrunner themselves?
Everyone involved in the show. My old boss used to say, like, he used to joke that if there's like a janitor in that office, like he's gonna get material to them. Like we get it to everybody involved, you know, even if they're, again, I said this earlier, there's certain execs at network studios and producers. I know I send them material. I know they're not reading it. So like, I just have to get it on their radar and make sure that they have it. But I know that I need to get to like everybody else involved and as many people as possible. You know, showrunner assistants are great people to talk to ahead of pickups and stuff because showrunner assistants, they're more admin focused. So they, especially when the showrunner's off on editing and production, they have a little more downtime and they love to read. And they also, they feel validated when they can have that opportunity. So when you talk to them and you're like, I'm a huge fan of this pilot, tell me exactly what you want to read or exactly, you know, what you focus on. We've had a lot of showrunner meetings get generated off of that because they're in the ear of their boss, and their boss honestly gives them, a lot of these showrunners give their assistants autonomy, especially the mid-lowers, because they're not as familiar with those people and they don't want to read 300, 400 scripts. So they're open to their assistants and the execs that produce production companies reading the material. So yeah, the question is get to as many people as involved with this project as possible.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And then Anonymous asks, I don't know if this is the same Anonymous as before or not. Hi, new Anonymous. Would you recommend reaching out to showrunners' assistants without representation? I think they're asking, would that be crossing some kind of line in the sand of things we don't do?
In my opinion, I think that's okay, but more to Charlotte's point of you're respectful about it and not coming off as creepy. Just be very clear about what you're going to ask and what you can, and like, just say hi, just be direct about what you're asking, saying, are you reading? Can I send you the script? Like, and be as eloquent as possible why you want to send it. And if they say no, or they say send it, like, great. Try to pitch yourself as best and as succinct as possible, but be very clear why you're sending it, like make it best effort, have read the pilot, like explain why you love this pilot and why you enjoy it, try to pitch yourself as an agent. If it was your friend you were pitching and you really believed in your friend, try to remove yourself a little bit and explain like why you feel like your script makes a lot of sense for it, and just respectfully say, if you're open to it, I'd love to share it with you and see what you think. Don't make the bar, don't give them too many expectations about you have to read the script or put too much pressure on them, but just try to be as direct about what you're looking for and respectful about it.
All right, cool. So we have a question from Evan. I think this is, I apologize if you are in fact a man or I messed up your pronouns. But Evan has a manager and has been getting some meetings, but is wondering whether or not prioritizing finding an agent to maximize staffing opportunities is a good goal for this year or next.
I think the agency situation is sort of complicated right now, which we don't have to delve into like in full. But some of the WGA is striking with some of the agencies right now. And so it is a complex time. So pretending but just putting a pin in that aspect of things for a second now. I know a lot of writers who have agents and managers. I know some writers that just have agents and some that just have managers. I think if you feel like your manager is getting you a lot of meetings, which is great, I don't think you need to add an agent onto that situation. But if you feel like your manager isn't getting you enough staffing opportunities, then yes, add them. I think it really is a case-by-case basis. I only have a manager, which is partially because of the strike situation, but also partially because I am very happy with my manager, and so I don't feel like I need to add anyone on right now. So it really is, I don't think there's a hard and set rule. Just know, obviously, that you're giving a percentage of your paycheck to these people. So make sure that they're really working for you and helping you in places that you need.
Yeah, I agree with part of what Charlotte said. I disagree with the other part Charlotte said, being an agent.
I was going to say, yeah. Well, you're a little biased there, Danny.
Of course I am, and I should be. But if you have a manager getting you meetings, that's phenomenal. And I think like that means that he or she is getting you out there. They believe in your material and like you're well on your way and they have the resources behind them. There's a lot of managers who don't have those resources behind them, but they're good managers in different ways. So there's agencies that can give you those resources and help source material and content for you. Every agent manager, like if you ask me like, what does an agent do when a manager does, like we can give you a general answer to that, but both sides wear a lot of different hats and give different responsibilities to their clients depending on what the client is looking for and what type of agency you're coming from. But I would say before the WJ walkout, not strike, started last year, if we're talking about WME, CAA, UTA, the corporate agencies, they were not the end all be all to get you staffed. Like APA would say is a full service agency, and we've had a lot of success staffing our writers and getting them overall deals, developing, packaging, all that good stuff. So there's not just like, it can be, when I was an intern and like I had to put together all the big movies that came out during the year and who rep the showrunners, who rep the directors and writers, it tended to be just CAWME. So it felt like, oh, there's only 2 agencies running this town. But you got to realize this is 1% of the industry we're talking about. If we're talking about like, okay, as a staff writer, because I used to work at CA and I got to a point where I was like, okay, looking after number 1, is this the place I want to be an agent at? You have to look at yourself as a writer and be like, okay, who is going to get me staffed right now? Is it an agent at CAA? Is it an agent at APA? May not be either. Is it a manager at blank and blank? Is it at 3 Arts or is it a 1-person company? And it really doesn't always come down to the name of the company itself. It is the individual. And it can come from your jobs can be coming from the agent side or the manager side. It's just where the industry is now still. Despite the WJ walkout and a potential strike in May, agencies still tend to have more of the resources, the information coming in and out to get you more equipped to find jobs.
Yeah, and Danny, you and I probably have more similar opinions on the WGA situation than you would think, but I will also just echo that what matters more than anything is whether the person is at the biggest agency in the world or is just a 1-person thing. Is it someone that you connect with who genuinely believes in you and your material, or are you just a number to them? And it sounds like from your situation, you're getting a lot of meetings. I don't think you necessarily need to add anyone on if you feel fulfilled by that person.
Yeah, especially if they're getting you shorter meetings, that's great. Like Charlotte said, if her manager is getting the job done for her, maybe down the line she wants to find an agent for whatever reason it might be. Maybe like for development, for finding IP internally or externally. But if your manager is getting you showrunner meetings, like that's pretty good. That's a pretty good manager from our opinion.
All right, cool. And then let's see here. I have a question from Keith. He is curious, what is a realistic salary for a beginning writer on a show? So I guess if we wanted to, however you guys want to break it down, I know there's a couple different answers.
Well, it is a real range because there are different salaries for different shows, but as a staff writer, which is usually a position that you can't really negotiate because you're just lucky to be getting the job, you're roughly getting paid pre-tax on a broadcast show like $7,500 a week. I think that's about right. Is that wrong, Danny?
It's WGA has it minimums at Article 13 is like 4,000 at 20-week minimums. It depends on how many weeks are guaranteed in the show. I think, Charlotte, because that was a higher. Are you story editor now?
Well, I also just kind of pulled that number out of thin air, so you should maybe take
Article 13 for staff writer, which, like Charlotte said, you don't really, unless you get an offer at the same time, we can negotiate that. But you tend to go, Article 13 is roughly like 4,474 a week for 20-week minimum. That can go higher if it's lesser weeks, or it can go lower if it's more weeks. You don't usually get paid by episode. That usually happens by the time you get to mid-level co-producer rate. But when you get to story editor and ESC, then you jump to Article 14K, which is roughly 6,000. So there's a little bit of a jump there, but that's pre everything. So after the government guts it and then you take commission, you're making maybe like 80, 90K if it's like a 20-week order, something like that. But now this is where things get interesting in May with a potential strike, because all these mini rooms coming out, all these shortened orders, some of these streamers you may not make as much money as you do in broadcast. You know.
Cool. And then I think Eric I think we might have already answered your question earlier whenever we were talking about ways to get your work out there. But if we didn't, then please re-ask, because it was like, building on top. But while we were waiting on that one, Shannon has a fun question, which could be a really good one to sort of start closing out on, because we only have about 9 minutes left. What are some tips to make your pilot really stand out?
I think, Jesus.
I just like throw a monkey wrench in right at the end for you guys.
I feel like I keep answering these questions like, write a good script. That's all. Just, if you write a good script, and that's what it is. I think you got to be very honest about what type of writer you want to be and what your voice is and what you want to say. Like, not every, and I don't mean that in that, not that your show has to have a message, like a political message or a statement, but it just, like, what do you want to talk about here? Like, why do you want to write? Like, are you a character focused person? Do you want to talk about family? Do you want to talk about love? Do you want to, like, write a cool action thriller? Like, what movies and shows inspire you? Or, like, what do you see on air right now that you would love to work on or develop a show like that, And I think in that sense, like, it'll give you a grounded sense and point of view in what you're doing and will help fulfill that. But you look at stuff that, even look at high concept stuff where it can be a contained thriller, or even stuff like Star Wars. Star Wars is still talking about family and relationships at the heart of it. You look at Buffy or Angel, they're talking about high school YA storytelling. Even This Is Us, which can get soapy, is still very character focused and then, like, knows what it wants to tell. Or Succession, where it's an hour long talking about terrible people, but there's like a weird satirical element to it. So don't, when you're writing ideas or stories, don't just like pitch this concept. And like when you're writing these characters, don't just like describe them with like a log line, because then it becomes a stock character. Like, try to breathe a life into them. Like, the same way you read a book and like they're explaining these characters and the nuances about them, even if that doesn't always end up in a 60-page script, you should have that in the back of your head, because when we are introduced to them in the pilot, there should be a general sense, we should have a general sense of what type of person this is. Like, where is their story from before we met them, and where are we going to go from there, And like, it can't just be like a slice of life, a slice of it, and then we have no gauge of where we are, why we care about these characters. And that's probably the hardest thing, like putting the story that you have in your head and putting it into a pilot. Really be honest about who these characters are, their personalities, the relationships and all that, and the world, and making sure it's as clear as possible in the pilot. But
yeah, I mean, that was literally such a beautiful answer that I feel like this one thing that I'm going to add is like fully stupid, but I did just want to say, like, make sure you proofread that script. There should not be typos in that script. Like, if that script is hard to read, you are immediately going to be put out. And I've read amazing scripts before where I can tell that the person is so talented, but they're not even like, they're not doing the simple things of getting the formatting right. And it makes it so difficult to read. And it's such an easy excuse to push someone's script away.
Yeah. You got to be a good draft writer. You got to know how to do all that. And that's important in rooms, but more and more it's like, know how to write a good script, but also have a good voice behind it, and you can pace a story right and do all those things, introduce the characters, the premise right. And that's, you're more than halfway there beyond a lot of other people trying to break in, to Charlotte's point. But on top of that, because the industry is becoming more and more creative driven, and the barriers of what network approval or approving from ad revenues, and it's more just putting content out there, it's becoming more voice driven. And so you want to be very confident on what are you trying to tell here and what you're trying to do. It just, the more generic it is, the less fresh it feels, because we've seen so many different things. It's like, how do we take these basic tropes and genres we're already familiar with and kind of spin it on its head, or take a new approach to our point of view and stuff.
Yep.
So.
All right, awesome. Well, I don't think we have enough time to get into another question. So for like the 4 of you who we didn't get to, or we didn't get to your second questions, I apologize. We did our best, but Danny, Charlotte, this was everything I could have dreamed of and more. Thank you so much.
Great.
It's so fun, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you writers for attending and for your lovely questions. Everybody, go have a wonderful Sunday. Take care, and I will see you all in the next one.
All right. Bye.
Bye,
Thank you for
guys.
organizing this. Bye.